They haven't even got like an ensuite.
No, they don't. They have none of this. All they have is a void in between kind of two shops.
I'm trying to work out, is it dark? It's probably dusty and...
Very dark, very dusty. Loads of screws everywhere. Zip ties, chip packets. I guess they could fashion a little blanket, like one of those emergency blankets. You know, like when your house is burnt down and the fire brigade comes and they're like, oh, are you cold? Why are you always cold? There's just been a fire. And they drape you with one of those tin foil blankets to keep you warm. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things, a weekly variety podcast that gives you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering.
We explore stories from the darker corners of true crime, the hidden gems of history, and the jaw-dropping deeds of extraordinary people.
I'm Kyle Risi, your ringmaster for this episode.
And I'm Adam Koch, your physiotherapist for the contortionist team. They need some work doing after their
Do they? They
show.
got tough joints.
Think of all the positions they get themselves into. Sometimes I have to actually flatten them out after a show.
Is it especially after reverse cowgirl?
Especially after reverse cowgirl.
And doggy style, and that's the only two positions I know.
That's not what contortionists do.
Yeah, but you're the physiotherapist.
Uh-huh.
And hey, it depends what age you are, right? If you are crouching on 75, reverse cowgirl is an accomplishment.
I'll say.
So if you can help with the physiotherapy for all of our freaks out there who are crouching 75 and need some de-stiffening of the joints, you are our man.
Yeah, Adam Cox, physiotherapist, keeping 75-year-olds still doing
nimble
reverse cowgirl. That can be my slogan on my van.
These intros always just devolve into just nonsense.
I thought that was generally the point.
I didn't realize that we'd built a brand on that. Anyway, before we dive in, a quick heads up for all of our lovely freaks out there. Remember that signing up to our Patreon gets you early access to next week's episode an entire 7 days before anyone else. And it's always completely free of charge. And if you want even more, you can become a certified freak for a small monthly subscription that will unlock all of our unreleased episodes an entire 6 weeks before anyone else. And this is literally the best way to support the Compendium.
And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. Your support really does help us reach more people who, just like you, love a good tale of the unexpected.
And the thing is that we ask every week, and I promise you, every time we ask, it works. People follow and people leave us reviews. And so keep them coming because it really does help. We are getting a whole lot of new listeners every week because of you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, freaks, that is enough of the housekeeping. Adam, today we are diving into an assembly of hidden habitats and artistic rebellion.
Okay. Yeah, I've got nothing. Is it about badgers going wild?
Right.
If they have got rabies and they're going around biting people, I reckon there's a story there, Carl.
Yeah, animal true crime. That's it. Adam, today I want to tell you the story that was every kid's fantasy growing up. Do you ever remember imagining yourself being locked in a shopping mall all on your own, able to roam free wherever you wanted to go and do whatever you wanted to do without the risk of ever being caught?
Yeah, actually, because there used to be the Disney store in the shopping mall near us when growing up. And they used to have this giant mound of teddy bears that I always wish I could just dive into. That's what I would do.
And you could probably disguise yourself inside that kind of heap, especially if it was around about the time that Up was released. Because remember Russell? Everyone used to say that you look like Russell.
By everyone, you mean you.
And everyone else, you are the spitting image of Russell, especially as a child. It's either that or Knick Knack from the Bond movies.
Yes, all right, moving on.
So if you wanted to kind of hide in the store, you could have disguised yourself as a Russell doll.
I could have done, but I didn't. So what would you want to do in a shopping mall then?
Well, the thing is, I used to fantasize about having the power of invisibility and being able to walk into Woolworths and no one was able to see me. And I'd just be able to take whatever I wanted. And I'd just stuff the things under my jumper, which would then make it obviously completely invisible. And then I would just walk out.
Oh, so stealing. You wanted to steal.
And the thing is, though, I used to fantasize about stealing all the time, and I'm not a stealer. The only time I've ever stolen, I remember we went into the equivalent of Woolworths in South Africa, and I remember stealing a pair of Barbie scissors.
Right.
And we got home, Mom was like, where did you get these from? And I just was like, oh, I took them from the store. And my mom was like, well, that's stealing. So she gave me this big old like little pep talk about how it was wrong to steal. And then she was like, we need to make this right. So we're going to go back to the store and we're going to tell the manager that you have taken these and that you're very sorry and you'd like to give them back. So we went back to the store and we called the manager and we had a chat with him. My mom explained to him what had happened. And then I said I was really sorry and I handed them over. And he was really mad and he was really serious. And he was like, I'm going to have to call the cops. So there's the lesson for you. Don't ever try to do the right thing. It will backfire. Another time that happened was really needed a wee. We were walking back from the shop and my mom was like, just wee behind that bush over there. And as I was weeing, the guy came home and he drove into his driveway and there was I peeing and my mom was obviously all really embarrassed to try and explain it. And he was so angry that he was like he was going to have to call the security guard.
Yeah, because you're peeing on his property.
I was a 5-year-old. What did you expect me to do?
Your mum knew that guy was like turning around the corner in his car and was like, oh, this will be fun.
Oh, God. Do you think my mum's that vindictive?
Yeah. And also, I think on the scissors front, I think she was just more ashamed that you stole Barbie scissors. And she was like, let's go back to the store and we'll steal you a proper pair.
That was my princess era. And I'm not going to apologize for it.
Okay.
But another fantasy I had is, again, going back to stealing, I would imagine walking behind the checkout counter, obviously completely invisible. I'd wait until the till was open and I'd just take like wads of cash and again, stick it under my jumper because of course it would turn invisible. And then I'd just walk out and then impress all my friends with how rich I was. I loved it.
Wow.
But what I'm talking about specifically is being locked in a mall overnight. And the question is, how would this even work, especially today with all the security cameras and the guards patrolling around at night? So I don't think in today's society that fantasy would ever play out as we imagined like 23 years ago. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? You'd be busted pretty fast. I think the only way that this would work would be if there was some sort of zombie apocalypse. But even then, you run the risk of being ravished by some zombies like in The Last of Us, right?
Yeah, it's always a shopping mall where there's zombies, right? Let's hide from them because you think, oh, they don't like to shop.
But they do like to shop because they're always in there. But in spite of, obviously, the challenges, this is exactly what a group of artists did in Rhode Island in 2003. They'd recently been evicted from the artist commune where they were living inside an old mill when they got the idea for a social experiment to prove a theory that a human being could feasibly live inside a mall full time. And I'm talking 24 hours a day where they would eat, sleep, shower, exercise, all in the mall. Anything that they needed had to be acquired within the mall. And the plan was that they would do this for 7 days. The experiment proved so successful and so easy that they decided to extend their goal. And by the time they'd finally got busted, they had been living undetected in the Providence Mall in Rhode Island for 4 years.
What? 4 years?
Mm-hmm.
How did that even happen?
Adam, that's literally the point of the story. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. Adam, today on the Compendium, I'm going to be telling you about this incredible story of how Michael Townsend, a young tape artist, and a group of his mates set out to prove that human beings could indeed live inside a mall. I'm assuming just based on what I've just said, you've never heard this story before.
Never heard this story before.
I heard this story about 6 years ago, but very recently a documentary has just been released, like literally this month. And it's in the theaters everywhere. That pretty much tells this entire story. But today I'm going to tell you the story from my vantage point.
It's got to be a good shopping mall, though, because I'm thinking it's going to need like a bed store. It's going to need like somewhere for food, obviously.
Yeah.
Fresh food. And then, I don't know, maybe like a gym.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously clothes.
Yes, that's it.
And maybe some toys.
And a candy shop. Yeah, some
a news agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to get the daily news.
TVs.
Right, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, all these things. It's a state-of-the-art mall, which I'm going to tell you all about. But today our story centers around a young artist called Michael Townsend. He was born in December of 1966, and he grew up in West Windsor, that's New Jersey. Not a huge amount happens there, but from an historic viewpoint, this is where a few very important people and events took place in the early history of kind of the United States, like Civil War kind of stuff, right? And the area he grew up kind of reminds me of like Stars Hollow. And I know that you absolutely hate this show, but that's the fictional town from the Gilmore Girls. Oh, so if you picture those kind of quaint wooden New England style buildings with kind of a local diner and a town hall, that's the kind of vibe that he grew up in. But forget all of that because it's irrelevant because he moves away. And throughout his childhood, he's super into comic books. That serves as a major source of inspiration for him. When he's 7 years old, he wins an art contest, which is when he decides that he is going to become an artist when he finally grows up. But after winning, he's left absolutely devastated when he finds out that the win was based purely on luck rather than merit. And so years later, he says that this was the moment that dictated his entire trajectory of his life, yet it was all based on a lie, which I just think is really funny.
So was he struggling to find the meaning of life?
He had an existential crisis, basically.
Existential?
Existential? Yeah. I just imagine him like the rain's falling down, dripping down the window, and he's just staring out, going,
my whole life's been a lie.
Yeah, complete lie. But he does get his first break when he is given the chance to write and illustrate his own children's book. It's called Billy Tattle in Say Cheese, and it's really charming. You can actually still buy this book after all these years. This was like in 1989. And it's basically a feel-good story about Billy Tattle, who is a kid who comes up with a plan to make this year's school photo unforgettable. And it's about his plan to trick his mum into letting him get a mohawk, basically. In 1989, he finally moves to Rhode Island to attend the Rhode Island School of Design. And on his very first night, he and a group of newly met classmates start experimenting with painter's tape as a drawing tool, literally using tape to draw lines on their dorm room wall. And that moment ends up defining the kind of artist that he ends up becoming throughout his entire career. And from then, everything he does throughout college revolves around this passion for creating art with what is essentially masking tape.
I was just trying to picture that. It doesn't feel like it's easy to work with.
It seems pretty damn easy to me. All you got to do is just follow a line and then just tape the tape down.
Yeah. But if you were trying to, I don't know, make a person's face out of masking tape, I don't know how that would work.
I'm assuming that he's mastered the technique, right? But the thing is, though, what is wild is that most people, they go to art school to explore different mediums and styles to work out what they want to specialize in, whether or not it's sculpture or fine art or abstract art, whatever it might be. And then after 4 years, you leave college still not knowing the direction that you want to take. But for Michael, this all clicks on day one. He just knew, I'm going to be a tape artist, which I think is pretty incredible. I left college not knowing what I wanted to do, even though I decided to do computer science.
Yeah, but I feel like that's a lot of people. It's good. Yeah, it's very rare. People just fumble their way through life going with regret and everything else.
That's the thing, though. It's such a lie. People are like, oh, you got to work out what you want to do. But the reality is there's 40, 50-year-olds out there that still don't know what they want to do.
They're just chasing the paycheck.
So basically, his work involves creating these massive murals, both on interior and exterior buildings, sometimes as high as 50 feet tall, and they stretch sometimes over 200 feet wide. And the process is always highly collaborative. So he very rarely works on his own. Teamwork is at the heart of everything that he does, often involving people that he's just met or complete strangers that are just jumping in to help him build these murals. But everything he creates is only ever meant to be temporary. So a key part of the process is actually tearing down the murals together just a few hours after putting them up, which just feels such a shame to me, especially considering how many hours people would spend creating these only to rip them down.
Yeah, especially after a few hours. Yeah, you'd want to appreciate it for some time, unless it's not very good, and that's why they're tearing it down.
They are typically really incredible. And keep in mind, he was doing all this before it was easy to document the process with photos and videos. At best, they were left with just a handful of photos and maybe a few seconds of film. And this was back in the day when digital cameras could only record in short bursts, 30 seconds, with a maximum kind of storage of 30 minutes. So he never really ended up with much footage to show for their efforts as well, which kind of just adds more salt into that wound.
Yeah, but then I guess art takes all forms, right? So it's the experience, it's the people getting together.
Exactly, and that's exactly the point of his tape art, essentially. But what is really interesting is that this limitation with digital cameras in the late 1990s and early 2000s wasn't because of the technology. Memory cards were big enough and cameras were definitely capable of recording longer videos. The real reason for the cap was actually a legal reason, because cameras and video cameras were taxed differently back then. And so manufacturers intentionally limited the recording time to avoid pushing cameras into the higher tax bracket.
Oh, so like a regular camera, digital camera, if you allow it to record more footage or longer duration, it would then be a video recorder, which then has a bigger tax.
Exactly.
Ah.
Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
So anyway, after graduating, Michael is commissioned for several really powerful and meaningful projects. One of them was this large tape mural on a children's hospital ward in the aftermath of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. He also took part in a project in New York creating 490 life-size silhouette portraits to represent some of the people who lost their lives in 9/11. and they would just all be dotted around Manhattan Island. And then just a few days later, they would just all be ripped down again. And I guess it's easy because it's painter's tape, right? How easy is that to just peel off? I guess if you didn't pull it down, it would just kind of eventually just fly off or blow off or peel off naturally.
Are they all different like colors?
Yeah. Typically, some of the murals I've seen would be the kind of blues and greens, so the typical painter's tape that you would see. But I'm assuming he could get different colors as well. There's also beige.
That's what I was thinking. Was he just using that on white canvas or whatever? And I just thought, would that look good? But now I understand that there's more color to it. Then yeah.
And he's also worked with major clients like IBM, Siemens, Hasbro, and even Disney. He runs workshops and team building initiatives that in total have involved over 50,000 individuals. But the consistent focus is always the same, and that is to bring different communities together under a shared collaborative goal of making something beautiful out of painter's tape and to say something about that collaborative spirit of humanity. So he's definitely an interesting artist that has definitely created a niche for himself in this world of tape art.
Yeah.
But back when he was a student, Michael was drawn to an area of Providence called Onlyville, which was a neighborhood that had become kind of the heart of the Providence creative kind of scene, if you will. And in the early 20th century, the area was kind of typically packed with factories and mills from its industrial heyday. But after the war, pretty much all of that industry just disappeared, leaving behind a lot of empty buildings. So struggling to fill them, landlords would kind of rent them out super cheap. And so a lot of students and creatives were attracted to the area. And so over time, the entire neighborhood transformed into this vibrant artsy neighborhood full of live music venues, quirky bars, offbeat restaurants, kind of like East London Spitalfields before it got really super commercialized. Because it's really expensive now, isn't it? But back in the day, it was easy for kind of people to just move in and set up startups and things like that. So that's the kind of vibe that we're going for here. Michael gets involved with an artist commune called Fort Thunder. And that was situated in an old mill that offered studio space for artists in a kind of a collaborative environment. They also held gigs there. There was a bar, there was a restaurant, and also offered living space. And so this is where Michael ends up living. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Providence launches a citywide rejuvenation project that was focused on expanding the downtown area. They were redeveloping some of the historic buildings. They were going to be spending millions of dollars uncovering kind of portions of the historic rivers that had been buried during the industrial era. And their plan was to build these really beautiful kind of river walks and add more vibrant public spaces in the community. And the centerpiece of all of this was going to be a brand new mall. It was going to be called the Providence Place Mall, which was set to cost $460 million and was intended to be kind of like a super regional shopping destination, meaning that it would have literally everything that a consumer could possibly want all in one location.
Sure.
And the site of the mall was huge. It was coming in at like 13 kind of acres. It was roughly the size of kind of the Louvre in Paris.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the biggest museums on the planet. So this is a big lot. And the mall was going to provide 3,000 construction jobs, another 3,000 permanent jobs once the mall actually opened. And they estimated that it was going to be attracting at least 15 million shoppers every single year. So this was going to be massive for the local economy. And while this sounds great, it was also controversial because after the mall was finished, developers started looking at the surrounding areas for other opportunities. And that meant that nearby areas like Onlyville, where the Fort Thunder commune was located, was now a prime target for redevelopment. And so projects were proposed and approved, and slowly tenants were sent their eviction notices, and Michael was about to lose both his community and his home.
Oh.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah, just for some commercial development and all that sort of stuff.
And that's the thing. This happens all over the world, these gentrification kind of projects where you end up displacing a lot of people that have pretty much called those areas home. Now, of course, Michael is not probably from a poor background, but you also got to remember that there will be people that are from poor backgrounds and poor demographics that do call those areas home, and they're probably going to be evicted.
Yeah, and they probably don't want to move. They live there all their life.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Fort Thunder wasn't going to be gentrified into kind of a more upscale building. They were literally going to tear it down and turn it into a parking lot.
Oh.
So it's like Joni Mitchell was right. Like you pay paradise and you literally put up a parking lot.
Yeah.
So around this time in 2003, the Providence Place Mall had finally opened and plans were announced that Fort Thunder was going to be torn down. So Michael and his wife Adriana and a few other artists were kind of lamenting this transformation that they were seeing sweeping through the city. And they kind of watched many of their friends and beloved businesses leave for the suburban areas because they just couldn't afford to live in the city anymore. While they're discussing this, Michael hears a radio ad featuring a woman talking very enthusiastically about how awesome the new mall was and how great it would be if she could just live in the mall and just never have to leave.
Right. Okay.
So they start joking that the rising costs of all this gentrification would eventually reach a point where the only way they could literally live in the city would be if they lived inside of a mall. So they got to joking about where they would sleep and how they would eat and, of course, where they would shower if this was a reality.
And then did it get to a point where they were like, hang on a minute, that's not a bad idea?
Pretty much. But the thing is, though, we talked about this at the top of the show. It's one thing to fantasize about spending a night in a mall, but it's an entirely other thing to imagine physically living there permanently, because there are actual logistical issues involved here.
I mean, to do it for a week sounds plausible. To do it for 4 years?
Exactly. But Michael got to thinking that maybe this woman was onto something, because he remembered something that he had seen a few years earlier when Providence Place Mall was still under construction.
Was it like a secret room or, I don't know, some like beds?
Kind of. So Michael often used to commute past the site, and over the months, he watched it slowly starting to take shape and began to notice some really peculiar architectural features. For starters, like the plot of land was oddly shaped. Running right through the middle of the plot was a river, which meant that the building would inevitably have a number of architectural kind of challenges that it would need to accommodate just to get around the fact that there's a literal river running right through the plot. He would kind of play this game where he would try to imagine what the different spaces were going to be intended for, like he's spotting things like the loading bay and the basement between the mall, the parking lot, and the kind of the skeletal outlines of the future shops that would eventually be encased in the mall's kind of outer shell. But there were also some spaces that he just couldn't quite place. There were these large voids that were really bizarrely shaped and sort of kind of tucked between the mall's internal structures, which he called these nowhere spaces that just didn't seem to have any meaningful kind of purpose at all.
So he could just tell that that was going to be like an empty space, like a storeroom maybe or something.
Not even a storeroom. If you imagine like you have a set of square blocks and you line them all up next to each other, and those are going to be the actual individual stores. And because it's a weird plot, if you kind of arrange them like maybe in a semicircle, there's going to be these weird triangular gaps between places, and you can't physically use them for anything. So when they finally put the shell over the building, those gaps will still exist, but they need to seal them off because they're not usable space in a way.
So they're going to be quite narrow gaps. Is that what I'm
Kind of.
seeing?
Not necessarily narrow. They could be narrow in some places, but they could also be very wide in other places, depending on the internal structure. So one area that stood out in particular was a spot where the outer walls were supposed to meet to form kind of a corner, but they hadn't quite connected, so it kind of left this big narrow gap between them. In reality, these nowhere spaces were simply unintentional byproducts of the mall's layout and the challenging plot of land that they had to contend with. And they were just formed when the surrounding kind of planned areas didn't quite fit together perfectly. Eventually, though, the mall was completed. Michael never bothered to check to see what they ended up doing about these kind of weird gaps in these voids. He just assumed that they sealed them off somehow and that the architects had just decided to sacrifice those spaces just in order to fit everything inside this weird plot of land.
That does seem a bit odd because I feel like an architect would never do that. They would always make use of that space because you think they could have fit another shop in there or, I don't know, they would have been more accommodating. But it doesn't sound like this was an accident. They were just a bit wasteful with the space.
Quite possibly. I'm not an architect. I'm not going to pretend that I am. I don't know. Maybe this happens way more. So who knows?
So you saying if I go to my shopping mall now, there could be some hidden spaces in there?
100% I know for a fact that there are. Because like 20 years ago, we were doing an event and we needed some movie posters. And I had a friend who worked at the View Cinema in the Castle Mall. And they offered to kind of like set us up. And I went down to pick them up. And she took me out through the fire escape. We ended up in this weird corridor, which was a cinder block corridor that you walk down. And that is essentially a void between the View Cinema and whatever is the next store around. So there are these voids and corridors that just exist all throughout the Castle Mall.
Weird.
It is weird, but I guess you have to, in order to fit everything together inside the shell of the Castle Mall, you have to sacrifice some space, really, that can't really be used by anyone.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
So like I said, the mall was completed. Michael just assumed that these voids had been sealed up in some way. He never really thought about it too much more, but the memory always just lingered in the back of his mind. So when him and his friends were joking about the logistics of what it would be like to live inside a mall, Michael tells them about how he watched the mall being constructed and how he observed these nowhere spaces being built into the framework, and that if they did live inside a mall, this would have been the perfect place. But he now figured, of course, they've all just been sealed up, right?
You would think.
You would think. So from there, the casual joking started to turn into actual plans to see if they could spend an entire week living full-time in the Providence Place Mall. They then decide that this would actually be a perfect social experiment where they could make a statement about how residential and commercial properties can actually come together.
Okay.
So they figured they could shower at the gym, which is exactly what you said. They agreed that they could eat all their meals at the food courts and they could use the public toilets whenever they needed. And the aim would be to see if they could exist inside the mall for 7 days straight without ever needing to leave. So anything that they needed, they would acquire inside the mall.
That makes sense. But where are they going to sleep?
Well, that's the thing, right? They make a list of everything that they'll need to bring with them versus what they would actually be able to buy at the stores. They realized, of course, that the biggest hurdle was going to be working out where they were going to sleep. They didn't kind of like the idea of sleeping on a hard concrete floor while longingly gazing at a showroom filled with soft mattresses that would kind of like torture for them.
Yeah, if there's like Mattress Man there, then of course you'd buy a mattress.
But the thing is, though, where are you going to store the mattress? Because the security guard's going to come along and go, this is a state-of-the-art mall. Why have you just put a mattress in this doorway?
Right. Okay. So they're thinking they're just going to sleep out in the open.
Exactly.
Not in one of these nowhere spaces.
On a bench or something like that.
Right.
Exactly. But it is at this point that Michael goes back to wondering if those weird nowhere spaces had actually ended up getting sealed off at any point. If they hadn't, then those spaces would be perfect for them to sleep at night without having to fear about being kicked out by security. And they could probably fashion something a little bit more comfortable for them during their 7-day stay.
Yeah. Okay. I guess it's not going to be too homely, but if you've got like a comfy bed to sleep on, it's dark.
You just need privacy, I think.
Yeah.
That's it. And you need protection from a security guard, I guess.
Yeah. Just like kids like jumping on you.
Yeah, exactly. No one takes kindly to like a tent in the middle of a mall, right?
No, I don't think people take kindly to tents anywhere that's not camping.
Remember we went to that anniversary party last Friday? And as we were walking along on the sidewalk, which is very narrow in Norwich, it's like maybe 2 foot.
Yeah.
And there was a bloody tent pitched up right there on the sidewalk.
Yeah, which is obviously sad because someone is homeless or whatever, but it's just a really odd spot. Like you'd think you'd find somewhere that's, I don't know, in a park or somewhere that's a little bit
There's
more...
a literal park around the corner.
Yeah, but no, just
Very
on the
bizarre.
road.
Yeah, very strange. I hope they're okay though. Anyway, so Michael and Adriana, armed with a couple torches, they head down to the mall and sure enough, beneath the movie theatre next to the parking lot on the outside of the mall, they find a narrow gap between two internal structures. It's about kind of 30 centimeters wide, barely noticeable unless you know exactly what you're looking for, which makes it really easy to miss, especially for like the mall staff and the security. They were both slender enough that all it took was them kind of turning sideways and then carefully shuffling through this gap. And on the other side, they then find themselves in this really dark, empty space. They're connected to a network of accidental, narrow corridors that winded between the mall's internal structures, which then led to like a series of chambers, each with varying sizes and heights and shapes, etc.
Right, okay, so they've gone into this nothing space, and then connected to that is a load of other nothing spaces?
Yeah, it's just a network of corridors and voids and spaces all between these internal structures. It's really bizarre.
And is there like proper doors and stuff like that where people could walk through?
No. Some of them might lead to like a fire escape or like to the car park exit or whatever it might be. But largely they're just empty spaces. And like I said, in my mind, I vividly have this mental picture because of that time when I went to the Castle Mall to pick up those movie posters. This is what it was like. It was just these cinder block voids between these different buildings inside the mall. It was very strange. So I have this vivid picture of exactly what they're seeing. And remember, at this point, the mall is barely 5 years old, right? Michael and Adriana are like the first people to ever set foot in these little hidden areas. Also, scattered across the floor are like leftover building materials. There's screws, there's zip ties, there's the odd crisp packet. Essentially, anything that the builders didn't bother clearing out because I guess the space was never meant to be accessed by the public or even by staff, right?
Yeah, but you thought they would have cleaned up after themselves.
Oh, Adam, when we were buying our house and waiting for it to be built, every time we would come and visit it, there would always be like fag packets and crisp packets, all sorts of junk everywhere. And sometimes when we were digging in the garden, we'd lift up some topsoil and we'd find a chip packet.
That's true. I forgot about that. This house is built on chip packets.
Exactly. So as they explored deeper, they eventually came to like this L-shaped void, roughly the size of a literal apartment. And they instantly knew that they'd hit the jackpot because this would be exactly what they needed if they wanted to shelter away from public view.
Yeah, but it's not like a sealed off area.
No.
They've squeezed through this gap, but it's not like they've gone into this nice room or anything like that.
No.
It's
literally just a void. in between this mall. But they also do discover that the void also connects directly into the mall through another abandoned accidental corridor on the inside. So this was perfect. They could access it from both the outside and also on the inside of the mall.
So does that mean then what you just said there, that they could go hide in the void, wait for the mall to shut down, and then they can then make their way back into the mall at nighttime?
I guess so, yeah.
Interesting.
So I think this is a perfect opportunity to take a quick break. And when we get back, Michael and the team are going to be moving into Providence Mall.
NetCredit is here to say yes, because you're more than a credit score. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partners. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
For more than 50 years, National University has been a military-friendly, yellow ribbon school that understands the importance of honor and commitment. With 4 and 8-week classes available, year-round enrollment, and more than 190 programs to choose from, we help veterans just like you define the next chapter of their careers. Learn more at nu.edu. That's nu.edu.
So Adam, we're back. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking this sounds like the worst holiday ever.
Why?
Well, okay, I know it's an experiment, but I don't know. They haven't got a proper bed.
Yep.
They haven't got like room service.
Because that's just standard, right?
They haven't even got like an ensuite.
No, they don't. They have none of this. All they have is a void in between kind of two shops.
Is it? I'm trying to work out. Is it dark? It's probably dusty and
Very dark, very dusty. Loads of screws everywhere. Zip ties, chip packets. I guess they could fashion a little blanket, like one of those emergency blankets. You know, like when your house is burnt down and the fire brigade comes and they're like, "Oh, are you cold? Why are you always cold? There's just been a fire." And they drape you with one of those tin foil blankets to keep you warm.
Well, I guess for them, they're thinking this is just going to be a week sort of experiment. So at that point, it's fine.
Luxury is not their objective here, right?
Yeah, they're not telling anyone about this, right? They're doing this in secrecy.
Telling a few people.
But they're not actually telling them all, like, "Oh, hey, we're just going to camp out here. Don't mind us."
No, they're not telling them all. So when they first stopped planning, there were kind of 4 or 5 of them. But as they start getting more serious, this eventually grows to like a little group of 8 who are all up for kind of the challenge of seeing if they can live inside Providence Mall for 7 days. They give themselves a bit of a kind of a group name, which
a cult.
called the Trummerkind, which basically means children of the ruins.
Okay.
Which seems appropriate at first until you realize that Trummerkind is a German word for orphan children who had to fend for themselves in the bombed out cities following World War II.
That was not tasteful.
No, it's not. So they're kind of drawing a parallel between war orphans and how they were kind of emerging from the rubble of Fort Thunder and their demolition and how they were trying to now fend for themselves. So like it's the same, but it's also a little bit different.
I mean, it's a lot different. This just feels like a group of students on a gap year trying to do something like out there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I see where they're going with it, but maybe a little bit tone deaf when you really think about it.
A little? Come on.
So Michael and Adriana, they report back to the others about what they had found. And this is when their mission objective changes. The challenge was no longer to see if they could stay in the mall for a week. They were going to secretly set up a permanent residence and live there until either they got caught or got bored.
Okay, so have they even managed a week at this point?
No, still plans.
So they're already talking about like actually moving in. Like,
well, I think they can see the potential in this void, right?
Sure, put on a new throw on this pile of dust. Get some drapes.
So they decide from the onset that in order for this to be a success, they need to make sure that they weren't going to draw too much attention to themselves. And so they decide that not everyone can live in the mall at the same time. Instead, they create this rota where a couple of them will each get the chance to spend a few weeks there before handing over to the next group. And in the rota, they also kind of allocate various chores for each of the group members to do to ensure the void remains clean and tidy. And from there, they start clearing out all the debris that was left behind by the construction work by stuffing their backpacks with screws and chip packets and bits of wood or whatever. And then using the same backpacks, they would then sneak in all the essentials that they needed. And aside from the essentials, they agree that as part of their social experiment, they'll purchase everything else they needed from the actual mall itself to preserve the mall ecosystem and maintain the integrity of what they were trying to prove.
Yeah, to get the full mall experience.
Yeah, you've got to get the full mall experience, yeah. So they purchase extension cords and they tap into the mall's electricity supply, which once set up, they use to then power lamps and a small heater, again, bought from the mall. For a bed, they build a makeshift base out of cinder blocks. They buy a mattress from 40 Winks. And by the time this is done, they had a space that was sparse, but it was a comfortable setup.
Interesting. So what were the essentials that they brought in?
Like toothpaste, toothbrushes.
They couldn't have got that from the mall?
I guess maybe they did. What can't you buy at a mall? Especially this is meant to be a super regional mall, right?
Yeah.
Where you can get everything you need.
And back then, malls were really good. Now, not quite as good unless you live in a big city.
Yeah.
Now it's like phone shops, charity shops.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can...
Sweet shops.
Yeah, you can't make a meal for a whole week at Poundland.
Hey, challenge accepted. Do you remember our mate? We probably shouldn't say this on the podcast. So scrap the name. I'll change the name. Her name's Sally. So Sally would host these international students. And she literally bought a house to accommodate the students downstairs on the ground floor, where she would have 4 bunk beds that she would put in this tiny, tiny room so she could host 4 people. She had a little shower and a little kind of kitchenette. And she would then go to Asda and she would buy like a whole bag of like chicken nuggets and some fries. And she would calculate that she could feed each child for 75p a meal.
She was like crunching the numbers.
Yeah, she worked out that each shower would cost 50p. Yeah.
And they're only allowed a shower a day.
1 shower a day. And she would then get paid like £20 per day. So she would really make her profit margins go. And because of what she did, she managed to put both their kids through private school.
Yeah.
So the savviest woman I've ever met in my life. So Sally could do it. Yeah. Sally could do a whole Christmas dinner from Poundland.
Yeah, she probably could. To be fair, the students would always love the meals, or that's what they used to say to them, because they weren't allowed junk food at home.
Exactly. She was like and because they all come from wealthy families, right? Because they're exchange students. So they never got to eat like pizza every night or chicken nuggets. And she would get 5-star reviews. Yeah. They just loved her. And she just let them do whatever they wanted. She just didn't give a shit.
It's probably why English food gets a really bad rap, because people like Sally, they're cooking the worst beige food ever.
So over the next few weeks, they stick to the roster where only a few of them will be staying in the apartment at any one time before handing the keys over to the next team. It works really well for Michael because he's, of course, traveling around quite a bit during this period, teaching kind of people how to do these tape murals, etc. And at first, they pour a lot of time and energy into making various improvements to their apartment. But eventually, they realize that they need to kind of balance this with that constant risk of potentially being caught. Like it becomes like this mindset, yes, we want to live somewhere nice, but we don't want to put too much effort and love into it because, of course, we could be out the door like tomorrow. It's like how you would treat a rental, essentially.
Yeah, so they're thinking about getting a new skylight, I don't know, maybe an extension, knocking down a wall.
Exactly.
Of the void. How much effort can you put into this space?
Oh, dear Adam. Of course, 1 week turns into 2 weeks. 2 weeks turn into 4. And eventually, 6 months goes by and no one's discovered them.
How?
And at this point is when their attitudes start to shift. If this was going to be a long-term thing, then a bed and a couple of lamps just wasn't going to cut it.
No.
So the first thing that they focus on is adding more of a sense of privacy throughout the space that they've built. They literally build a few compartment walls out of cinder blocks. And inside one of those walls, they install a literal door to secure the space. So they now have a closed-off space.
Right.
Next comes the kitchen. They build a fully kitted out kitchen with a fridge and cooking appliances.
No way.
Then they bring in a 4-piece couch, complete with a love seat. They add a garden rug. They bring in a dining table and a coffee table to finish off the living area. They then decorate the space with various potted plants, hang framed artwork on the wall. They bring in a TV and a PlayStation for entertainment during kind of hours where kind of they're bored of just roaming this 13-acre kind of mall.
Uh-huh.
What's incredible is that you'd expect them to get noticed, especially like dragging like a sofa or a mattress through the mall, right?
Yeah, I can't believe they managed to do that. I mean, one, pot plants. I can't imagine there's like proper daylight.
No, not really. They're probably fake plants, I guess.
Fine. And 2...
Or you accept that they're going to die, just like we do.
Yeah.
We're going to buy you. You're cute, you're pretty, you're nice. But you are going to die if you come home with us. And the plant's like, take me home.
The other thing is, if they're sandwiched in between some shops, I don't know how close they are to like, I don't know, people that own these shops. But are they going to be like, do they have to keep quiet? Or can they be quite noisy and stuff like that?
So first of all, when it comes to physically being seen dragging a mattress or a sofa through the mall, right? They're in a mall. that sells sofas and sells mattresses. So you couldn't be any less out of place.
I guess so, but you're carrying a sofa. I imagine like the shop clerk is, are you sure you don't want to get this delivered? And they're like, no, it's fine.
No, we'll take it. We're already down the road.
Yeah.
But we used to live in the city, and I used to do that all the time. We bought a chest of drawer from Luce's, and they were like, do you want to get that delivered? And I was like, no, me and my mate will carry it. So we did like a proper Ross and Rachel where we walked 4 blocks. I did have to convince the clerk that me and Miguel were sleeping together and that we had sex 294 times.
Of course.
Of course. Little Friends reference there for you. But yeah, so it wouldn't really look out of place, I don't think.
I guess so. And then does this mall actually shut down at night? Like it wasn't open into 24 hours?
It did shut down at night, yes.
Okay.
So there would be a quiet period where kind of the security guards would be patrolling, but all the shops would be shut and stuff.
Fine. And so at that point, they obviously do have to be quite quiet out the way so they don't get caught or ushered out.
Well, that's the thing. As for the noise from their construction, remember they built a literal wall and they installed doors. It wasn't an issue. For one, the space was really well insulated. And second, they were tucked deep within the kind of the bones of the building.
Right.
But as a precaution, though, they did agree that they would only do work during the day, so it could be disguised with the natural bustle of the mall and many sounds. But honestly, they really didn't need to.
I know, because I think like these shop owners would be like, do you hear rats? And like people like scurrying around and stuff like
But
that.
exactly, then it's not your problem.
Yeah.
Because you'll be like, oh, it's probably in the walls or it's probably another store. But again, when you've got the music playing, you've got loads of punters coming in and out, you're not going to notice any of that noise.
But did some of the shop owners like know what was going on? Or like there's this rumor? Did you know that there's people that live in this mall? I haven't seen them.
The borough is.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a couple good theories that we'll come on to later on. I
Okay.
don't want to spoil it just yet because I don't give any credence to those theories. But they do have one rule though, right? And that is to always dress like you're supposed to be at the mall. Like it was their way of blending in. And since obviously they didn't have a toilet in their apartment, even like quick trips to go for a quick pee or to grab a pint of milk or whatever, you couldn't just nip out in your joggers and your flip-flops, right?
I was saying like that. They can put on their dressing gown
Yeah.
and then walk to one of the shops.
And this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, at a time when going to the mall is where you dressed up, right? This is where you wore your best. You don't go in just joggers. If you wanted to nip out to go to the toilet, you had to put on your Hollister kind of like polo top. You had to put on your big buckle belt, spike up your hair. You couldn't leave the apartment without doing your hair.
Yeah, that's a lot of work just to nip out.
So as more time passes, the apartment doesn't just become comfortable. It starts to kind of feel a little bit luxurious. They bring in a glass and timber credenza to display all of their china and their beautiful crystal stemware that they've collected over the months.
Nice. And did they have like a display of stuff they stole from the mall?
No, I don't think they stole anything. I think they did try to do an honest job. about
Okay.
it. I mean, there are some images of mannequins in their apartment where they've kind of arranged like silent, like little roommates, but it looks like they've made them themselves.
Okay.
So they've got like no head, but they're clearly made out of paper mache. They're fully dressed. They're sitting on the sofa or whatever like that. I don't think they stole anything.
Well, apart from the electricity and
True.
Not paying any taxes and stuff like that.
True. And squatting.
Did they actually have jobs at this point? Because I guess they needed to furnish this
Well,
place.
Michael had a job, didn't
Yes,
he?
yeah.
And I guess the others were just living off their student loans, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Who knows? And the thing is, though, aside from plumbing and natural light, they had, for all intents and purposes, created a fully functioning, extremely comfortable apartment. The space itself was like 800 square feet, which is quite large. Like, to put that into perspective, a flat in London of this size would easily cost like £2,000 a month.
Yeah, and they're paying nothing.
They're paying zero money. So going back to the original question, can human beings live inside the mall? The answer was clearly yes. But since they still hadn't been caught, the question now evolved into something else entirely. How luxuriously can human beings live inside a mall?
And how long can they do it before they get detected?
Exactly. So do you want to see some images of it? Maybe you can tell our freaks of the show what kind of vibe you're getting from these images.
Yeah, because it sounds like initially it was a bit like they are squatting, and now it sounds like opulence. Oh, well, this one, they've got a Christmas tree. Of course they're going to celebrate. That looks fairly well lit. It doesn't look dingy. It's got like that kind of those pipes or tubes with covered in foil.
Which is very in now. Very
Yeah,
industrial look, you know?
It's got an industrial look, but it still looks quite warm and nice.
See the wall that they've built, and they've literally installed a door in there to secure the space.
That is the tiniest TV, mind you.
It's very small.
Like, I don't think they made TVs that small.
But you got to remember, they've only got like a small gap that they can fit through, like 30 centimeters wide. So
Yeah,
you
but
can't exactly fit a flat screen unless you turn it sideways.
yeah, but then how did they get the sofa in? I would have
It's
thought
true.
they got it through
I have no idea.
the fire exit or something.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay, there's the door. Oh, yeah, and the breeze blocks that they made. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a mannequin that they made. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can tell it's paper mache.
Yes. It's incredible, isn't it? They did all of that themselves.
Yeah, it's not as big as I thought it was going to be, but it does look homely. Do you know what it looks like? It looks like a set for like a soap or something. Does that make sense?
No.
Oh,
no, it doesn't.
It looks like it should be like a TV set in the way that it's kind of dressed. Because I think it's the lighting. It just looks a little bit off, but it looks homely.
Great. So now you have the sense of the vibe that we're dealing with here. And so in their pursuit to stop making the apartment as luxurious as possible, they start making plans to add a second bedroom. Their intention is to install floorboards throughout the entire space. And they even start exploring how they can tap into the mall's plumbing system so they can install a fully flushing toilet.
But where's all your poo going to go? I can't picture it.
They haven't done it just yet. They still need to work it out, but that is the dream. And the thing is, though, like, if they can achieve that, then the apartment would be fully self-contained. They wouldn't have to keep getting dressed every time they just needed to go to the toilet.
Yeah, but what about showering? They still needed to go to the gym to shower.
Well, if they can tap into the plumbing, then maybe they can also install a shower. They need to also make a drain, I guess.
And then running water? I guess you could get like a fountain, but no, they're going to go for a full-on sink.
Yeah, who knows?
Wow.
So by this point, it's 2007. It's been 4 years since they moved in. They do have a little bit of a mishap. One evening, the rostered group staying there at the time had come back from a long day of roaming the mall to find that someone had kicked in the door from the outside.
So someone's found their place.
Exactly, yeah. When they go in, they discover that someone has stolen their PlayStation, but also a bunch of other things that they wouldn't expect a thief to actually take. Whoever broke in had taken some of the artworks off the wall that they'd been using to decorate. They also took part of a tape mural that Michael had erected, and also they took a photo album. But they didn't take anything else. Like, they didn't take the TV, they didn't take anything else of value that was laying around the apartment. And of course, this totally freaks them out.
It's like a personal attack. I think if someone's just gone to take the artwork, then maybe they know who's staying there.
That's the sense that they're getting here. That is it someone that we know? Have we told the wrong person?
Yeah.
Because this has been going for 4 years. They're extremely proud of this experiment. So of course they have told people. So Michael calls an emergency meeting with the rest of the Trummerkind. They wonder if maybe it was someone they knew, possibly someone that they told about the experiment. They just can't work it out. So they agree that they need to tighten up security. And if they were going to keep the experiment going for as long as possible, they needed to commit to not telling anyone else about what they were doing. And there was absolutely no more bringing guests back to the apartment. So it's like, do not speak about the secret apartment.
It's like Fight Club.
Exactly. So several weeks go by. There's no new break-ins. Michael has a fellow installation artist and a close friend visiting from Hong Kong, and he is itching to tell her about the secret mall apartment, knowing that she'd be seriously impressed by this. So without telling anyone, he decides that he's going to break the rules a little bit and he's going to bring her to the secret apartment just this once. He walks her through, obviously, their plans for the second bedroom, the possibility of installing floorboards, and maybe the logistics of tapping into the mall's plumbing. Just as they're heading out the door, they hear voices on the other side, followed by the unmistakable crackling of walkie-talkies.
Oh, security?
They both freeze. Seconds later, the door bursts open and in walk 3 very angry-looking men from mall management.
To be fair, if I was a security guard and that, you're like, what the hell is this?
Exactly. Michael doesn't know what to do, so he just simply raises his arms, he smiles and says, surprise. And then his mate from Hong Kong is like, what the fuck is going on? Or she's like, yeah, this is art. This is art right here.
I'm part of this art.
So neither of them try to resist or escape. They fully cooperate and they follow the men down to the mall security office where they wait for the police to arrive. And shortly after that, they're both arrested for trespassing. While they're waiting, Michael discovers that the break-in that they experienced a few weeks earlier were actually 2 brand new security guards that had been employed just a few weeks back. And so they were there and they were very smug about being the ones to discover the secret apartment.
Oh, so security had known for a couple of weeks then?
Yes, basically they had spotted the Trummerkind members entering and exiting from the same access point that no one else seemed to be using. So after a bit of investigating, they stumbled upon obviously the cinder block wall, the locked door, so they busted it obviously open. Once they were inside, they took any items that they thought might help them identify who they were. That's why they took the photo album and obviously some of the tape off the wall. But the reason why they took the PlayStation was because they figured that they could log into some of the games to see if there were any details within the game that might indicate who they actually were. So it's quite
That's
clever.
smart, yeah.
It was. This was also back in the day before it was all like connected to the internet. So they were purely relying on usernames and what you might have called your character or whatever.
That's a stretch.
Well, like if you're playing like The Sims.
Yeah, but you might like a nickname or something. Or
Possibly. They didn't find anything, basically. And so the mall security, they just waited until they spotted someone else entering the space while they were on shift. And bingo, eventually they see Michael and Jaffa sneaking in.
Wow.
So Michael and Jaffa, they're both taken down to the police station for questioning. Jaffa is quickly released since obviously they realized that she was just not involved. But Michael has to spend the night in jail. And the next day, the mall decides that they were going to come after Michael, and they insisted that he be charged with every single felony that they could think of. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, disturbing the peace, and causing a safety risk.
Did he disturb any peace? It feels like no one knew that they were there for 4 years.
Exactly. So he is issued his court date shortly thereafter. And when he was in court, it was kind of one of those court sessions where it's just kind of like one in, one out. And the judge just gets a list of the cases that he's going to be seeing that day. And so he can see the charges, but he doesn't really know what's going on until obviously the defendant is standing in front of him, essentially. So when it's Michael's turn, the judge listens to the evidence being presented by the mall's lawyers. And you see the judge's face just contort with confusion. And then finally he just cuts off the lawyer and he's like, what you and your friends did was very weird, but this is not a crime.
That's the thing. Like, yeah, you shouldn't have been on there. You might have stolen or, put up the electricity bill.
Exactly.
Actually, yeah, I've got better things to be doing.
Exactly. It does say there's no proof of theft. There's no proof of vandalism. There's no proof of breaking or entering. He says at best what you've done is trespassing, but that's just a misdemeanor. And so I'm going to have to ask you to leave my courtroom. So basically, he is literally just sentenced to a slap on the wrist.
Well, I mean, I think that's fair.
I think so. Obviously, this is a huge relief to Michael, who later says that he could tell from the judge's slight smile on his face that he was somewhat impressed with what he had actually managed to do.
Yeah, anyone should be.
So Michael was free, the charges were dropped, and he didn't even have to pay a fine. But the mall was then forced to go through the humiliation of handing back all of his stuff, which they were not happy about. The only card that they really had to play at this point, which they did in a really smug fashion, was issue Michael with a lifetime ban.
You're not allowed back here.
You're not allowed back! And they made it clear that if he ever came anywhere near the perimeter, that he would be arrested immediately. And so Michael was added to the list of 665 other people who'd already been banned from the mall, which are mostly just like 15-year-old kids who'd been busted for skateboarding or rollerblading on the premises.
Is his photo on a wall or something? That's quite a lot of people.
It is like, I'm like, wait! Let me just scan through. Yeah, you can come in. And believe it or not, up until January 2025, Michael has never been back.
Wow. And so he got away with that for 4 years, but he didn't live there like ongoing for 4 years, or no one did. They had like stints.
Exactly. Yeah. Because Michael was traveling. He was a professional artist at this time, going all over the world doing his tape art. So there was always someone living there.
Because I was just trying to think, because you'd be living in the mall and then you'd move out whilst the next group moves in. So then you're going to be you're paying rent or living with your parents or something?
Yeah, and the thing is, though, you got to remember that this wasn't about evading or getting cheap rent. It was a social experiment.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I just wondered if they were trying to do this to save money as well, but actually, okay, fine.
So after he was acquitted, the story ends up attracting a huge amount of media attention. Michael and Adriana were the only two original artists whose identities were known at the time. The others kind of chose to stay anonymous. And so Michael and Adriana ended up being the face of this incredible story as a way to promote their tape art business. They did all the rounds on various TV shows and did various newspaper interviews, and they're all really cool to read. I'll link to a couple that I found and I'll put them in the show notes. But what made me really sad is that they so clearly absolutely adored living there. Like, it really seemed like this was a really defining era of their lives. They talked about how it was such a shame that they got busted because in their minds, they wanted to continue building this ultimate adult fort house, implementing all the different improvements that they had planned. And they even joked about eventually bringing their own kids there and potentially even passing it down to the next generation, which, wow. I mean, is very much a 20-year-old kind of mentality, but it meant something to them.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like when you're at university where you're staying in halls or like a student house, which isn't that great realistically, but there's like a charm to it and you have all these memories and stuff like that is actually quite a special place for you. But yeah, to raise kids though, I don't know. Yeah.
Come on kids, it's our 2 weeks.
It's time to go to McDonald's.
Yay, going to the mattress store. So after all this was over, Michael did feel compelled to issue a public apology to the mall and the police. And so on his blog, he posts this really lengthy statement that 100% is funnier if you try and read it with a sarcastic tone. In it, he apologizes to the Providence police for wasting their time, to the security guards who were forced to look really incompetent, which he says wasn't his intention, and to obviously the mall owners for making them feel like they were being disrespected. You can read it obviously for yourself on Trummerkind.com, but make sure if you do that you read it with that kind of sarcastic tone in mind. It's really funny. And of course, through the story brings a whole new level of awareness to Michael's tape art business. And like we discussed earlier on, it's not just Michael erecting these tape murals, it's extremely collaborative. And as a teacher, he's really effective in helping people understand what it truly means to operate as part of a team. And so for this reason, as well as hospitals and charities, big businesses invite him to do team building workshops at their organizations. But when Michael arrives at these locations, he has no idea what he's physically going to make. All he has is just a blank canvas in the form of a wall on the inside or the outside of a building. It's all about that community collaboration where it's the general public or the corporate employees that decide what they're going to build. They decide what their motivations are going to be and what their methods are going to be. And of course, what they're going to build. And it's just Michael that facilitates that process of them bringing it to life. So it's really cool what he's doing. And so under Michael's guidance, they build these really incredible murals, which they just end up tearing down like mere hours later.
Yeah, that's still weird, but
it is weird. But I guess we're now living in a time where you can better document a lot of that stuff anyway. So you do leave with some really incredible footage, I guess. Maybe even a time lapse.
Yeah, maybe it's all about being present in the moment.
It is. And working as a team, Adam.
Mm-hmm. Does he go around other shopping malls now and go like, I wonder where I could build a little place to live?
Maybe. I think he's now outgrown that, right? He does a really brilliant TED Talk as well, where he talks about what he does and obviously how he fosters this collaboration process. And it is really inspiring. It's probably one of my favorite TED Talks that I've ever watched. And I know like there's not that much glamour in tape art, but definitely watch his TED Talk. It is really inspiring, especially like how noble he is as well in the work that he does. It comes from such an altruistic place. But I also was expecting him to have written a memoir about this whole experience. But as of 2025, there doesn't appear to be any plans to do so, which, I mean, is a shame. I would love to have read that memoir.
Yeah, that would be really good. I think it could be called Sticking It to the Man. And it could be turned into a comedy show, I think, a sitcom. I feel like it's perfect for a sitcom. Maybe like 1 or 2 series. I don't feel like it could go on much longer than that.
For 4 years, 4 seasons.
In this episode, we're going to work out how to get a couch in here. Should we get copyright for that in case he does do it?
We could buy the name for it, Sticking It to the Man, and be like, hey.
Yeah, Michael, you can't have that.
Yeah, exactly. Pay us. Thing is, though, over the years, he has been approached by like 30 different directors all wanting to make a film about this. But Michael has rejected every single one of them because they were mostly interested in what they did rather than the message behind why the artist did what they did.
Right, okay.
Eventually, though, by chance, Michael does meet a director called Jeremy Workman in Greece when he's doing a tape mural. And unlike the others, Jeremy is genuinely interested in the message and not just the prankish nature of kind of like living in a mall. And so after 15 years, Michael finally agrees to work towards making a documentary which would focus on obviously the creation and maintenance of the apartment, but also the themes of urban transformation and gentrification and the kind of corporate resistance at the heart of the story. And so on the 21st of March, 2025, a documentary film called Secret Mall Apartment was released in theaters. And I haven't seen it yet, but it does have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's pretty impressive. Do they recreate or do they revisit their space? Are they allowed to? Because he's not allowed on the mall, so they couldn't have done.
Up until this point, he wasn't. But yeah, basically it's just a Talking Heads documentary. And I guess there's maybe loads of recreated kind of footage from what they did and how they did it. But they do have some footage, which I guess is going to be part of the documentary. But it looks incredible. And what I like is it does center on kind of the themes that they're trying to explore, like gentrification and kind of corporate resistance and things like that. So it looks pretty damn good.
And I want to know how you make a paper mache mannequin.
Do you think they're molded out of their own body?
Yeah, because they were wearing their clothes, like they fit just perfectly.
Might find out if you watch the documentary. Of course, Michael does have a website called Trummerkind.com. It's not really been looked after, but it does showcase some really interesting photographs of the apartment. And of course, all of Michael's really great artwork he does in kind of the tape art world. But recently, in March 2025, after 18 years, the mall ban was actually lifted and he can now return to Providence Mall. And on top of that, he's been given permission to create a tape art mural in that same mall. Interesting.
I kind of feel like that mall is now famous for this. And I feel like they should recreate that space and almost like people lived in this mall. Not to kind of like encourage it again, but that's quite a unique piece of history.
Exactly. And I think that's what they realized as well, because they changed management. And so the new management decided that actually this is part of the rich history of the mall. So actually, let's lift the ban. We've got the documentary coming out. It's going to attract a lot more kind of fame for the mall as well. So obviously self-interest there. But yeah, Michael has been back to the mall, and they did let him visit the spot where the old apartment was. And it is just now a big empty void from what I could tell from the I think that's where it was, but they've cleared everything out.
Yeah. I feel like they should recreate it and people can go visit and be like, wow.
Yeah.
See how these people lived.
And again, a testament to how much this meant to Michael, because when he was in there, he described it as like a strange act of closure, going to visit that space, which is a shame. Like when you are at university and you are in those formative years, the things that you do and the experiences that you experience, they do kind of stay with you. They are really important to you. So I can completely understand what he must be feeling in that moment, revisiting that empty space.
Yeah, you built that with your friends and stuff. So yeah.
Exactly. And Adam, that is the story of Michael Townsend and the Trummerkind and their 4-year stint in the secret mall apartment.
That is very cool. Did not know that existed. And I think because we cover quite a few dark stories, it's nice to cover something that's quite, I don't know, whimsical and just fun.
Wholesome. I'd call it wholesome.
Wholesome.
Yeah. Before we do wrap up, I did read on Reddit, and I don't know how true this is, and I really hope it's not. But apparently, since all of this came out in 2007, a couple of people on Reddit have claimed that they were friends with the security guards that were working at the mall at the time. And apparently, it was common knowledge that most of the security guards were in on this and actually just turning a blind eye as long as they got to use the space as a secondary break room to take extra unscheduled breaks.
Oh, really?
So basically, they would just say, I'm off to do a perimeter check. And then they would just go hang out and play Grand Theft Auto for a bit.
And that's why they stole the PlayStation, because they were like going to get rid of their
high score.
Their high score.
The thing is, though, I don't know how true that claim is, but consider that the people who busted the apartment were actually 2 brand new security guards who had only been working at the mall for a short time. So it's entirely possible that maybe they weren't briefed yet or trusted yet to be in on this little secret. I don't want to believe it at all. I'm choosing not to believe that. And I can't verify that because that's just people talking shit on the internet.
Maybe. Although I can sort of buy it, because I just thought, if you're a security guard and you're there every day, sure, you can have some regulars that walk through, but you're going to spot certain people. You're like, you are here every day at 9 a.m.
It does seem plausible, and you're right. But Michael hasn't said that's the case, and I choose to believe Michael. I trust Michael. He seems like a genuine, honest, nice guy.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So should we run the outro for this week?
Let's do it.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating foray into the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode.
If today's episode sparked your curiosity, do us a favor and follow us on your favorite podcast app. It truly makes a world of difference and helps more people discover the show.
And for our dedicated freaks out there, do not forget that next week's episode is already waiting for you on our Patreon, and it is always completely free to access.
And if you want even more, then join our Certified Freaks tier to unlock the entire archive, delve into exclusive content, and get a sneak peek at what's coming next. We'd love for you to join our growing community.
New episodes drop every Tuesday, and until then, remember, shit, I didn't get an outro for this week. Don't build a secret mall apartment. See you next time.
See ya.
For more than 50 years, National University has been a military-friendly, yellow-ribbon school that understands the importance of honor and commitment. With 4- and 8-week classes available, year-round enrollment, and more than 190 programs to choose from, we help veterans just like you define the next chapter of their careers. Learn more at nu.edu. That's nu.edu.